Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Paul Brown. I am a second year master's student at Yorkville University in the counseling psychology program. I'm currently doing my practicum right now, and I actually have two practicum locations. One is at a residential treatment facility geared towards first responders and military personnel. And the other one is a private practice in Peterborough that deals primarily with trauma focus. I'm a qualifying registered psychotherapist, again, and I'm in Peterborough, Ontario. Today, we're going to be talking about grief and loss and also discussing the concept of identity reconstruction. So the learning objectives for today are going to be to define grief and loss, to review the grief processes and theories around grief, to review the concept of identity, to understand the impact of identity loss, and also to explore the concept of identity reconstruction, and to learn strategies to support others as they are dealing with grief and loss and identity reconstruction. So what is grief? So grief is a normal reaction to a loss. It's an emotional response, and it is very much an individual process, but also with interpersonal connections. So it's an individual process based on I have my own unique way of grieving, of experiencing that grief, and of expressing that grief as well. It's an interpersonal process because um, some of those expectations around grief and the expression of grief are based on societal norms and cultural expectations. So, the way that I grieve when somebody dies is different than how I grieve maybe the loss of a job. So that's me on an individual level, but how I express that is influenced by the culture and the environment in which I live. So that's the interpersonal part of it. Interestingly enough, in terms of the interpersonal, people tend to support others who are experiencing grief and the expression of grief, but they also tend to avoid people that are experiencing grief and expressing grief. So it's along the lines of saying, yes, it's okay. You can cry, you can have those feelings and go through that experience, but please, I'm not going to be around when you do that. I'm going to be elsewhere because it's uncomfortable for me to be around you when you're grieving. Grief is non-linear, so we don't go from experiencing the grief to all of a sudden in a straight line feeling that the grief has been resolved. It's a very messy process where we're going back and forth and zigzagging and up and down and spinning around. So it can be a bit of a chaotic process. It's non-linear, it does not happen in a straight line. It is often characterized by minor disruptions in our daily life, and it's usually resolved within a few months. So when we have this loss and this grief experience, it's a normal process to go through that, and within a few months to start to feel better and a little bit more like ourselves again. But when it tends to go on for a long period of time, then that is what we would refer to as maladjusted grief. So that is when it is prolonged and people are experiencing debilitating grief. When people can return to normal activities and kind of feel like they're more like themselves again in a short period of time, then that would be an adaptive grief response. And sometimes that includes finding some meaning in the loss, or also might turn to religion or spirituality to make some sense of whatever that loss was. So different types of losses, grief is often associated with a death experience. So someone around us has died, but it can also refer to divorce or the loss of a relationship, intimate partner relationship, or a close friendship. It can be employment loss, and that can relate to a loss of a sense of self in terms of that employment, the friends that we have at that employment, the routine of employment, and also the financial loss that comes with losing a job. And of course, suffering that financial loss can be another form of grief, and it doesn't necessarily have to be work related, but it could be uh, you invested in something and it didn't go the way you planned, and there's a significant financial loss from that, you're going to experience that as grief. You can also experience loss through illness, and that can be your own illness or the illness of others. So if I suddenly become ill, I might feel a sense of loss that I don't have that previous health status, or I might feel that way about other people if they're experiencing illness. The same can be said about injury. I think for myself, back, it was just over 20 years ago, I had a motorcycle accident. And I was a very fit and healthy person before that. I had the motorcycle accident. I had to learn how to walk properly again because of all of my injuries. I suffered a significant sense of loss because I didn't have my mobility. People can experience a sense of loss through aging, and that is the loss of youth and that mobility and that vigor and that joy that we had as children. And as we age, some people might feel a sense of loss that we don't have that anymore. So you'll hear the expression that youth is wasted on the young, because I don't have maybe that mobility or that energy that I once did to fully appreciate or take advantage of some of the things in life. You can also experience several types of loss at one time. So if we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, you could experience multiple losses at once. So you could have the death of someone close to you as a result of COVID, or maybe there was an illness of someone around you, a loss of mobility and a loss of freedom from being stuck in our lockdowns and being in our homes. So we don't have that ability to have social interaction, or you were limited to specific places that you could shop. So some people could experience the loss during that time. Immunocompromised people are still experiencing loss as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic because some of them are nervous to go into public spaces to do their shopping or to interact with other people. Now, one thing that has also happened is there's been some reconstruction as a result of that, because now you'll see more often people are wearing masks when they go shopping, and that could be either they're not feeling well and they want to protect others, or it could be there is nervousness of others people being ill and I'm wearing a mask to protect myself. Another type of loss could be, loss of an activity. So that could be, you played for a specific sports team for an extended period of time, tryouts came along, and now you don't get selected to be on that team next year. So you have a sense of loss associated with not being on that team anymore. So most people are familiar with the Kubler-Ross um, 5 stages of death and dying with that model. The first person to really write about grief and loss was actually Freud in the early 1900s. And then in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed the 5 stages of death. She was studying death and dying, and this has since been morphed into the 5 stages of grief. And they're listed as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And when these were presented, they were presented in a linear fashion. I can remember in my undergrad being taught them that you started with denial, then you went to anger, then bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance, and then you were done with that grief process. And what we've learned over time, it's not actually how this model was intended. It wasn't intended to be a linear model. It was intended that you experience these different stages, and it might happen in a linear way, but more often than not, you're going to bounce from stage to stage, and you might go back to previous stages, or you might jump a stage. So it doesn't happen in a linear fashion. The 5 stages model has evolved, and now the Kubler-Ross Institute is using the change curve. So the change curve, again, is nonlinear. And the way they're described is that when you experience a significant loss, that you start with the shock of, this has happened. And then the next stage is to go into denial. No, this can't be. Frustration, depression, experiment, decision, and then integration. So integration would be when the identity reconstruction starts to occur and you've actually integrated that loss into your life moving forward. So again, as much as they're listed, even on this chart, it shows time at the bottom as the continuum. And it implies that it is a linear model. It's not intended to be interpreted that way, that you can go from stage to stage and you can jump stages and go to previous stages at a later date. The dual process model is one that I really like, and it talks about an oscillation between two factors, between being loss oriented, which is focused on the stressors, and restoration oriented, which is focusing on coping. It acknowledges that individuals can swing between these two positions at different times. And so the loss orientation is the individual's concentration on and their processing of the experience of loss. So this is being focused on the fact that that loss has occurred. And the dilemma is that if you remain here for too long, then the grief is enhanced. So we end up stuck in that loss and grief loss orientation. The restoration orientation refers to the struggle of imagining and reorienting yourself to the world without that deceased person or without that thing that we've lost. So it's processing, getting towards that acceptance and integration phase. But it is, we have to be mindful not to force this phase, or what can end up happening is, these people that are relentlessly positive, or that they, kind of ignore that loss orientation, then the grieving is neglected and it can become unresolved, which can lead to problems down the road. So it's important that people are experiencing both of these orientations and understanding that they can go between both of them. Again, it is non-linear, and it's also important to note that it is a non-binary model. And so if we think of a binary model as being 0 or 1, 0 is loss orientation and 1 is restoration orientation. In between 0 and 1, mathematically, there are an infinite number of decimal points. And what this model kind of reinforces that is that you can be anywhere on that continuum. You can be in any one of those infinite decimal points. You can be at different points in your grief process. So what is identity? Identity is our sense of self. It's who are we, who am I? It's unique to each person. And as much as it contains that uniqueness, it also contains sameness. So, yes, I am an individual, but that is in comparison to the groups that I am connected with. So that can be my cultural groups, that can be, ethnicity, it could be my age, it could be my sexuality, it could be, my athletic status, father, whatever the case may be. So if I use the expression that I am a hard worker, that is unique to me, I am a hard worker, but the sameness becomes in comparison to who? It's in comparison to other workers or other people. So there's uniqueness and sameness involved in that. So it's a relationship with a larger collective social group. It is a combination of past, present, and future. So it is based on our past experiences, the things that are happening now, and our projection and our assumptions of what our future is going to look like. Those are the things that create our identity right now. So these can be our roles, our values, our beliefs, and our affiliations. And they are formed through experience, culture, social interactions, and groups. Examples of these can be ethnicity, gender, social group, activity, or even to say, I am a good person. That is part of my identity, and that is in comparison to other people. Some people, if you get into core value, that can have an identity base to it as well. It says, I am a bad person, or I have no value. That's part of your identity. So identity, ultimately, these are the labels that we give ourselves and that we give to others. So in this process today, this conversation, we're talking more about ourself. So these are the labels that we give to ourselves. So for me, I would say I am a father, or I might say you are a child. I might say I am a Newfoundlander. I am a coach. I'm white. I'm male. I'm a fun person. I'm a hard worker. These are all labels, and these are all identities for me. Now, with these individual identities, there also comes intersectionality, which means that these identities overlap in different ways. So it could be, yes, I am a male, I am white, I am a fun person. I could say, the intersectionality could be, I am a fun white male. So there's overlap in all of those identities. Um, coming together. There can also be, intersectionality conflict, which is where those identities overlap, but I have conflict, internal conflict about those identities, or it could be conflict within a community, in terms of how my identity, yes, I fit under this global umbrella of a collective identity, but because of my individual identity in that group, I may not necessarily fit in with everyone within that social group. Identities can change over time. So, we talk about it's a culmination of past and present and our plans for the future. So, when I mentioned the motorcycle accident earlier, my identity changed the second that I started to process that motorcycle accident because I was not the same person I was before that because of that experience. And these, I also think about children, so, or about people when we have children. So before I had children, my identity was I am a child because my parents were still alive at that time and I was a child to them. And then I had children and my identity shifted at that point. My primary identity was not as a child anymore. My primary identity at that time became I am a father. So it can evolve based on some of those life experiences. And again, when my father died, there was some shifts to my identity at that time as well. These conversations about, am I still a child? So when we talk about grief and identity, identity typically we're not aware of our identity until there's been some form of a disruption, some kind of a loss. Someone has brought attention to it, or something has brought attention to it and asked us to define it or to label it and to be aware of it. And when we have these grief events, loss events, and this disruption, we're suddenly aware of what our identity is or what it was. And when we have these events that happen, they fracture our sense of our current self and it disrupts our vision of our future self because now things have changed. I don't know. First, I might say, I don't know who I am right now, and that disrupts who am I going to be in the future. And again, this is an identity fragmentation. So who am I without that person? I think of my oldest son who's, he plays hockey and if you said to him, tell me about yourself, the first thing he would say is, well, I play hockey. So if an event happened and he was no longer able to play hockey, whether that be a financial event or an injury, or, when we had the pandemic and everything was shut down, then there's a sense, well, who am I now that I can't play hockey anymore? Or, in working with some first responders, some of them through various life circumstances, they're in treatment and they're realizing that they're not going to be able to return to that profession. So then there's a sense of, well, I am a first responder. If I can't go back, who am I going to be? So then that's that fragmentation. And if these losses are left unresolved for a long period of time, then this can lead to mental health struggles down the road, such as depression. So when we talk about identity reconstruction, it is an important element of managing the grief. So it requires a reconciliation of the past and our present selves. And I would challenge that if identity is based on our past experience, our future selves, and our proposed future selves, then I think that reconciliation and reconstruction also has to incorporate our future selves or our perspective on what that future self is going to look like. So it's a journey of integration and meaning making. So trying to find some meaning as to those losses, what happened, and incorporating. So again, it's re-authoring our self narratives and processing and rebuilding. important to recognize that, again, our reconstruction is personal. It's based on us as a person, but also the groups that we are connected with. And that's that intersectionality, that's that uniqueness and the sameness of our identity. So if we had needed those things to build our identity initially to construct it, we are going to need that in order to reconstruct it as well. We have to incorporate that loss so we don't forget it. We don't erase who we were or those events or that loss event. We incorporate it into the future. And one thing that I think of for myself is I was a volunteer firefighter for a number of years. And I remember when I left the fire service and I would roll up to a car accident as a civilian, but I still identified myself as a firefighter. I would say I'm a firefighter because I had not gotten to the point where I was able to accept that life change. And I felt the fact that maybe I was a firefighter didn't hold the same value as I am a firefighter. Recognizing now that those people were in need and the fact that I had that training still holds value. So now I can comfortably have a conversation with people and say, I was a volunteer firefighter. It's part of my journey. It is still part of my identity of something that I did. And there are many aspects of the fire service that still exist in my life. I'm just not wearing the hat anymore. When we talk about treatment for grief and loss and identity reconstruction, for most people, it feels like a forced process because the loss was forced upon them more often than not. So I did not choose for that my partner to die, or I did not choose for my partner to leave me. That decision was, it was an external force that made that decision for me. I did not choose to lose my job, or I did not choose to be cut from the team. So the grief or the loss is forced upon us, and then we have to start dealing with that. And one way to do that is through interaction. So again, if identity is created through interaction, then it needs to be reconstructed through interaction. We would start with setting SMART goals with our clients. So as Nadia mentioned in her presentation, we want our goals for the client to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. And it's important when we get into talking about the specifics of it that those goals are unique to the client. They're individual to the client and not us. So we have to, ask the client questions about what their specific goals are, and also take into consideration the cultural context that they're approaching this identity reconstruction from. Whether it's individualistic culture or a collectivist culture, that could factor into it. Their peer groups could factor into it, and all different components of their social groups could factor into their identity reconstruction and their goal setting. We want to make sure that they are setting the goals and that we are not forcing them or pressuring them for our goals, because if we pressure them, then that can lead to maladjustment for them because they're not actually meeting their goals, they're looking at somebody else's goals. So specific strategies that can be used for treatment, one would be staying busy. This provides distraction for the client so they're not stuck in a place of rumination. Finding some benefits to the loss, and if the person who died didn't suffer, so you could maybe talk about the fact that there are some benefits to the loss, that person is no longer in pain. Or you could talk about, the loss of a job provides more time at home for children. An example that I heard recently was a first responder who had gone into a treatment program, and their brother had passed away before that in a car accident. And this person, through treatment, was saying, it should have been me. I've been a terrible person. I've done all these bad things, and my brother was such a good guy. He had a wife and he had children, and why did he die and I'm still here and I'm not a good person? Through some discussion, it was found out in this person's story that when their brother died, their father came to this particular individual and said, "Listen, I've lost one son. I'm not going to lose another. You are really struggling with your addiction. I'm going to do, if you're ready and willing, I will do whatever it takes to help you get through this and to help you find sobriety and mental wellness," and really supported that individual over time through treatment, through psychotherapy, and the support of their family. That individual was able to get sober and became a very powerful person in the life of their nephews, was able to be an excellent uncle, supportive to his brother's wife, widow, became a really good son to his own parents, and really turned his life around. So, as much as that loss was so significant to this individual, the benefit that came out of it was that they were able to find themselves to become a better human being. So, one thing that we have to be careful of in these experiences is that we don't minimize the loss, but still finding some benefits. We want to stay away from things like, "at least they're not suffering anymore," because that minimizes the loss. So we can say, it's awful that that person is gone. They are not suffering anymore, and maybe there's some strength and some comfort in that. Other strategies can be, comparing experiences, so it can help to make sense of the situation, and again, to find those benefits if we're talking with other people, and seeking other people that have had some similar experiences and kind of understanding what they've gone through, because then you're not going to have this sense of aloneness. You're going to have camaraderie. There's comfort in being around others that have had a similar experience. Finally, using buffering can be really helpful. So buffering is when you are in social groups that specifically are not discussing the loss. So you get to have, you're kind of protecting those people and yourselves from being in the loss and from experiencing loss in those moments. And it's just being able to exist in an environment where that loss is not there. So it can provide some distraction for the person. When we're talking, a big one is social support. And what this can do is provide some emotional validation for the person. So the lack of social support is linked to negative outcomes for our clients. So this is, again, can be our depressions and our anxieties. And the maladjustments. We want to make sure that they are experiencing social interaction and social support. Support groups are particularly effective for people that are experiencing maladaptive grief. We need to be careful that we are not pushing people to therapy and to groups too early. If they are going through, the normal grief process, and yes, they're struggling, but things are kind of getting better through a couple of months, then they're likely not needing psychotherapy. They're likely not needing a support group. If we push them into those groups too soon, or if it's not warranted, then it starts to pathologize the grief process and make them start to feel that, oh, maybe something is wrong with me. So we have to be careful that we're not pushing too hard too soon. Again, following their lead, their goals. But if we are recognizing some sense of maladaptive grief, then support groups are an excellent avenue for clients. It gives them permission to disclose their own stories. So there is giving and taking of information. They can dismantle their grieving experiences, so normalizing some of the variances. Well, I've gone through this experience, and or this loss, I'm experiencing it here, and you're experiencing it this way. Let's talk about some of those differences, or maybe some of those similarities. Again, we're talking about the social support, and just that feeling of being around people can have some benefits to the clients, and that sense of hope. So you have experienced a loss, or I've experienced a loss, and I'm grieving at an 8 out of 10, but there's somebody else in that group that's at a 5 out of 10. That might give me some hope that, well, I can get there too, or, have a shared experience with them to say, well, what have you done to kind of get through this experience? So certainly not an exhaustive list, but some modalities that can be beneficial for those that are experiencing grief and loss and having to go through an identity reconstruction process. One would be art therapy, because it promotes an exploration and expression of feelings that occurs in the grieving process. And it gives people another avenue to express those emotions and doing it in a way that's not just talk therapy. So whether that's through music or through drawing or painting or sculpting, whatever the case may be, it's another way to express and to emote. Another way is emotion focused therapy because it can help clients differentiate between those emotions that are associated with grief and other emotions that might be things like resentments or guilt or fear surrounding that loss. And emotion focused therapy can help them differentiate those things. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be effective because it deals with some cognitive restructuring of those grief related thoughts and trying to adjust the way that we are thinking about that loss. And finally, solution focused therapy. As the name says, it's solution focused, so it's looking to solutions and ways to do things differently and how to move forward. And it is a very future focused therapy and helps people to look to the future as opposed to dwelling on the past. So in review, the things we've gone over today, grief is an individual process, but it is impacted by cultural norms. So that's that individuality with sameness that impacts our grief, and that also impacts identity construction and identity reconstruction. Identity is not a fixed element within ourselves. It is based on our past, our present, and our projected future. And we've also reviewed that there are several effective treatment modalities to process these emotions around grief and loss. And amongst them, the most important aspect seems to be social support for those people that are dealing with grief and loss and going through identity reconstruction. I want to thank you for sitting through the presentation today. I hope you found it insightful and got something out of the presentation. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion in the forum online. Thanks, everybody.